Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. COVID-19 vaccination protects you and those around you. When communities are vaccinated, fewer people get sick. Community immunity begins with each one of us. Visit vaccinate.wv.gov to learn more about COVID-19 vaccination.
All right. I'm going to start the show off, Karen, today because we have some special events that just happened. And we wanted to kind of highlight some of the good things and just some of the trends that we're seeing as far as the livestock market goes. So every year we do a couple graded feeder calf sales where we will sort and grade feeder calves and put them in pens based on likeness. So we're looking at weight, we're looking at color, but also size of the animal too. So we have different framed animals. Another thing that we look at when we sort these calves into likeness is quality. So it's a graded sale, and some of the requirements are fully castrated calves. And the other big thing is dehorning. So we don't want any horns in this group. If they do have horns or if they're not fully castrated, or if they have pink eye or lameness or something like that, maybe not severe lameness, but there is a throwout category as well, so that, when we're selling the pens, they have been graded and we are getting good quality animals. And it's a great way because, if you think about the cow-calf market, most people do it on the side. They have full-time jobs. They don't have a huge pen they can put together. So a lot of times what they'll have is when you take several animals, they'll auction them off in the farmers' lots that they bring in. But with the graded feeder calf sale, obviously you keep track of the animals you brought in, but it puts them with other animals that are like them so that when buyers are at the auction sale, they can say, okay, I'm going to get several uniform animals, and maybe the bids go a little bit higher. So we do have those numbers. There is a graded sale. This was on the 18th of September, 2021. And also that afternoon is a regular sale. And it's always fun to just kind of look at the numbers and see the trends, because the idea is that the graded sale that's been sorted and been grouped by likeness is going to bring a little bit more, because it's typically a better way to sell calves and finish them off. So let me go through some of these numbers here. We'll start with the regular sale because I think more people are familiar with it. So we got medium 1-2 frame, 2 to 300 pound calves. This was the sale on the same day, $88 to $175. Steers and bulls, 3 to 400 pounds, went from $70 to $179. So on the high end, these prices are looking pretty good. 4 to 500 pound steers and bulls, $65 to $173. 5 to 600 pound bulls, $56 to $154. 6 to 700 pound steers and bulls, $102.50 to $152. 7 to 800 pound steers and bulls, $60 to $152.50. And the large ones, 800 pounds and up, $70 to $132. Now that's a typical sale, but I don't have necessarily the range because these kind of went for a set price. And because they were grouped by likeness, we just kind of have the set price that they went for. But over here, if you had all black, grade medium ones, average weight 436 pounds, total number of cattle, in this group there was 5, they went for $173. And if we're looking at 315 pound cattle, total head 3, those went for $1.68. Here's a large pen, 19 total cattle, black, average weight 493. Those went for $1.54. So, on the high end, you see a lot of similarities. But the nice thing about the graded feeder calf sale, and this is typically something that I tell people, it's a little bit safer because, everything that was steers or heifers, nothing went below $1. In fact, I want to say some of the lowest prices I see, not counting the throwout, was $1.03, but that was one animal because there was nothing to match it with. But other than that, most of them went for well over $1.10 as far as the low end goes. So on the high end, we see maybe not a whole lot of difference, but on the low end, nothing drops to 65 cents per pound, which is really the nice thing about the graded feeder calf sale. You're not necessarily going to get a whole lot more. Theoretically, you could, but I think it's just a safer way to market your cattle so that it doesn't just bottom out because of one animal that they don't like. Because when you start bringing in all the animals that you want to sell that day, if there's one that's just not resonating with the buyers there, then even the higher quality ones are going to go for lower than they typically would because it would bring them down. So when you sort calves by quality and by type, that doesn't happen. So if you have a buyer that wants black cattle at a set weight, and there's another buyer that wants the same thing because everybody wants good quality cattle, it gets a little bit more competitive, and you typically don't see those bottomed out numbers below $1. But that's what I like about the graded feeder calf sale. It's not heavy requirements. There's no weaning requirements. There's no vaccine requirements. The vaccines can be given on the buyer's end, but it's a great way to reward people that don't necessarily have the facilities or the time, to do the weaning, to do the vaccinations. And I'm not saying that those aren't worthwhile, because you get the right buyer and you can get a lot more. But if you don't have that time or that capability, then honestly, the graded feeder calf sale is just a great way to do it. There are 2 fall sales a year, one in September, and there's going to be another one in the fall. So if you are interested, just reach out to the Belmont County Extension Office, and I'll be happy to give you those details. But those are some of the trends that we saw. And like I said, I find it successful, maybe not because you're getting these rocket high prices, but it's a safer way to do it so that you don't bottom out and get a real bad sale.
Right. When you have sales like that, the most important aspect of it is that the buyers know that they're going to leave with a quality product. Whenever those buyers come out, they're looking for something that is uniform, that's going to grow at a uniform rate, and that is going to provide them a product in a expected amount of time. And so if they can go in and they know that they're going to get a large quantity of the same qualities and size, then they're going to show up in force, and there'll be more buyers, which means there's more competition for the product. Whereas if you show up one day and you have, 20 cattle to drop off, but there's no buyers there, then you're not going to get a good return. So these types of grouped sales are actually very beneficial to the seller and to the buyer because it makes their life easier. They don't have to come back multiple times to get enough animals to fill their facility. When you're looking at the uniformity, that is going to increase your pricing. But when you look at, say, like the West Virginia feeder calf program, that does have those vaccination requirements, and it does provide a higher priced product. But again, like Dan was saying, if you don't have the facilities, you don't have the time, these grouped sales are an option to think about. So when you're looking at your calving dates and your insemination dates, you want to make sure that you're timing it so that you can be ready to go at these grouped sales.
Yeah, and this one is a fall sale. I think it's a little bit more popular to sell your calves in the fall so you don't overwinter your calves as well as your cows. We've done multiple shows on trying to keep that weight on during the wintertime. Sometimes it's a good year and you have good hay. Sometimes you don't. And a fall sale is just a good way to unload any unnecessary expense that you might have over winter. But I'm sure there are spring sales out there. It's just not done in this area because of, I want to say, demand and popularity. But, it's kind of geared towards the producer with just a little bit of calves, the 5s and the 10s and the 15s, sometimes even higher. But you don't see a lot of the bigger guys doing this because they're able to market those larger number of animals. They can kind of uniform them themselves. They can wean themselves. They have a better marketing capacity than the smaller guys. But the smaller guys do have this, and it does seem to help out. I always like to emphasize the low side, because once you see that, you're like, okay, that could make or break a good year.
Right. One of the things that we try to do on this show is emphasize the production guidelines for those small farms, because when you get to the bigger sized farms, they have seed reps and chemical reps and all sorts of industry people that are out there supporting them. And we gauge the show for the small farm. We're typically in the introductory to moderate level of understanding, and so we try to keep things fun and simple, and we hope that you enjoy that. All right, so we started off last week talking about woodlands, right? And that your cattle in the woodlands, maybe not such a good idea, but there are some methods to do it. But let's say that you don't want to deal with the woodlands and you just want to graze your cattle, but the property that you just purchased is all forested. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit today about conversion and how to make that decision as to whether or not it's a good idea to convert it to just pasture land, and effective ways to do that without losing all of your soil.
Yeah, and then one of the things that we were talking about a lot was the topsoil, right? Karen was talking about, what was that term you used for that very fine, loose soil that's up top?
The Duff Layer.
The Duff Layer. Oh, yeah. No, that's the stuff. So we did
I just had a picture go through my head of, Duff Man from The Simpsons, except he's covered in bits of leaves instead of with cups of beer. He's handed out good organic compost.
Well, and now we all have that image. So thank you for that, Karen.
You're welcome.
But this Duff Layer, we did talk about how prone it is to erosion and how delicate this layer is. So you start putting a heavy animal tromping around in this type of soil that doesn't typically do well with the grass, because let's face it, grass is a full sun plant that's canopied by all these trees. So it doesn't do well. So it's not gripping that real loose, fine, organic matter soil. And then you put a heavy animal in there, and then you start erosion, and then you start compaction, and then you get sedimentation in the streams.
And then all the trees die, and then it just spirals downhill. It's just not a good thing all around.
So, if you want more pasture, or if you want land to be pasture and you have trees there, there's a lot of things you have to think about. One is you do have that very fine, delicate layer of topsoil. But another thing that might not be as well known is that soil, it's going to be a very acidic layer. Typically, Karen, what do you think as far as like a range of pH that you see most forested soils at?
Wow, that is a really hard question to answer. Soil characteristics are based on the parent material, and that pH is going to vary based on the soil type as well as that vegetative cover. So, I guess it would be safe to say that most forest soils are going to range from extremely acid to slightly acid, so from 4.0 pH to about 6.5 pH. However, this number is also going to vary with the species of trees that are dropping twigs and leaves and such and contributing to that duff layer. So then you add the quantity or the depth of that duff layer, which is going to influence the amount of acids that are being produced by microbial decomposition. So I guess if you want to take a step back, you look at your coniferous forests, like say your eastern hemlock, they're going to have a much lower surface pH, looking more to that 4.0 pH range than a deciduous forest type like oak hickory, which may be in the 6 to 6.5 pH. Again, you're going to have to do a soil test to know for sure. So when you're looking to convert your woodland to pasture grasses, keep in mind that your pasture grasses prefer their pH to fall between 6.5 and 6.8. So go out and do a soil test in your woodland. Find out what your pH is, where are you starting from, and then you can go and say, okay, well, I'm going to need to apply 4 tons of lime per acre and split that between 2 applications. So that's going to double your fuel time going across the fields. And so you can start to build in all of those hidden expenses by just starting off with a soil test.
And, Karen, you kind of jumped ahead of this, but just start thinking about this stuff, right? So you want to put a certain type of grass down. I'm going to guess you want some cool season, perennial, new varieties, grasses that do well, maybe a new type of orchard grass that doesn't bolt as early. Maybe you want to put a endophyte friendly fescue in there just to keep that weight gain high. Keep that endophyte in there just to keep the grass a little bit more resilient to environmental stresses. And I'll tell you what, you have a pH of 5, those grasses that are desired aren't going to take right away. So there's got to be several steps involved in here. I mean, one of the things that Karen said is liming. So what you do is you come up with a plan. A renovation is not a one-season thing. It's a multi-year thing. And you got to be patient, because if you're not patient up front, you're going to pay for it in the end. You're just you're going to be working on it for years without realizing if you just slowed down first couple years, you wouldn't have to put so much work into it. So, that's just kind of a philosophy, but make a plan, because plans are the best way to mitigate problems. We always talk about mitigation. At least I feel like that's probably the word I use most in this show, because there's no solution without some kind of detriment, right? Whether that's time, whether that's labor, or whether that's just you're growing this so you can't grow that. But you have that acidic soil. So that's something that you really got to consider. Those perennial grasses do not do well at a pH of 5. And this is kind of like the double whammy that we get in Eastern Ohio and like the Ohio Valley area. We're already phosphorus deficient on average. So once you drop that pH to 5, the availability of that phosphorus becomes so scarce that nothing is really going to grow well except for all those weeds that you're going to battle for the rest of the time that you have that property. So the first thing you got to do is think about how to change that pH a little bit, right? Am I going to be able to get some machinery in there? Do I have to cut down a few trees? But one, you're going to want something to hold the soil. And two, you're going to want to know how much slime you need so it does grow what you want. So I would recommend, if you're going to start cutting things down to be able to get in there, one, do it in a way so that you're not bumping straight up against a stream bank that erosion is going to start happening rapidly. So you want a buffer zone.
Right.
And that buffer zone might be good forever. You can always move cattle through a buffer zone, but keep that fenced off so that you have that riparian area before a stream.
Right.
And then have it so that you can not only lime, but you can put a cover crop in there, an annual crop like annual rye, maybe oats.
All right, I'm going to back you up a few steps here.
Okay.
Before we get to taking the trees off of the land, my first thing I'm going to tell you is contact a forester and make sure that this is the most profitable and best use of your property. There are a lot of values in woodland, and perhaps you just need to expand your pasture a little bit. You don't need to take out the whole woodland. Or perhaps your woodland's actually more valuable than you thought it was, and you will make more money off the trees than the cows. There are some things you need to consider. But when you're looking at your woodland area, if you have a hillside that's got more than a 15% slope, pasture is not your best option here, because you're going to be fighting erosion constantly. Even after you get your grasses established, anytime the cattle wear a path in it or anything like that, you're going to be fighting erosion. And so keep an eye on what your landscape looks like. And if you have more than 15% slope, you really want to consider what kind of erosion you're going to have to be fighting against. And there's different steps you can take as you're making the conversion to reduce erosion. Like Dan was saying, you've got to leave that buffer zone around your riparian area, fence that off. And there is cost share available in most places to fence the cattle out of these stream areas. Now, if you're just getting started and you don't have any cattle yet, it's a little bit harder to get into those programs because it's to correct problems instead of prevent problems, but I'm not going to get into that. But when you're looking at your woodlands and you're looking at transferring it to pasture, step number one is getting a good logger. someone who knows what your end goal is. Because if they come in and let's say they're harvesting your trees in March and we have a lot of rain in March, then that soil is just like taking your tractor out in a crop field and tilling in March when you have wet soil is going to get compacted. And then your pasture grasses aren't going to grow as well. So you want to work with a reputable logger who's going to come in and clear that property when the soil is dry and reduce the compaction that's going to result from that timber removal. Another thing you want to think about is what are you going to do with the tops of the trees? Loggers don't typically take the tops. So you can work with them to grind the tops up and get a mulch pile, or they can grind them up and drop it off someplace else. But that's probably going to be an extra fee associated with the removal of that timber or those trees if they're not timber size.
And I really want to caution against mixing these wood chips with the soils and
oh yeah, don't do that. Yeah, don't do that.
like that is the bad idea. And the reason behind that is, yes, you're adding organic matter, but the problem is the carbon ratio is so high that it's going to bind up all the nutrients and nothing's going to grow because all the fungal species that are necessary to break down those wood chips are going to be tied up. They're going to be feasting and nothing is going to grow. One of the reasons why you can't, like a lot of times you have a stump and that stump's decomposing. It's really hard to get things to grow around that stump because there's so much activity there as far as the hyphae and the fungus breaking that down that all the nutrients are bound and the plants can't get established. So, you spread that throughout a whole area, your grasses are never going to get established because there's nothing available for that grass to take.
And you don't want to go out there sprinkling nitrogen around because that's just going to increase the nutrient availability for all the weed seeds that are out there. Because on your forest floor, you have a vast amount of weed seeds that have been sitting there dormant in the shade. And all of a sudden, you're going to expose them to sunlight and they're going to go, woohoo, and they're all going to sprout all at once.
Oh, yeah.
So you do have to think about, how you're going to manage that. So throwing some nitrogen out there just to get your grasses started is a really bad idea. You want to get your grasses started. And once they're really going, then give them a little bit of nitrogen boost. And that's going to help them outcompete the weeds.
And when you say your grasses, I'm really strongly recommending an annual grass, like an annual crop, just to be able to hold that soil in and give that lime a chance to neutralize. So I would always recommend a two-step process in something like this because the chances of you getting your desired grasses with the weeds there, with the acidic soils, that perennial cool season grass just isn't going to take. You're going to have to take a step in there to smother out all those weeds that are there to hold the soil in place and give that lime a chance to neutralize everything. So I'd recommend a two-step process. And one of those things around this time, it's going to be an annual ryegrass. Put an annual ryegrass in there and you're going to get a cover. You're going to be able to lime. And come the following spring, you have a better pH to work with. You have ground cover and you'll have a better chance of getting those perennial grasses established starting in spring so that by the fall, you might actually have a nice pasture with the grasses that are desired.
Now, I'm going to throw out a hitch into your giddy up. If your if your woodland is suffering from this lovely new invasive we have called Japanese stilt grass, it basically looks like dead hay laying on the forest floor in the wintertime. It is really aggressive at growing, and it'll start off in those nice, moist, shaded areas, but then it will go everywhere. Once it gets started, it's really hard to get control of. And the best way to control stilt grass is with a pre-emergent herbicide in the spring. Now, that is going to germinate before your crabgrass and your foxtail. So you've got to get out there really early to get your pre-emergent herbicide out. But if you are converting a woodland and you have Japanese stilt grass in that woodland, you want to make sure that you are taking care of that particular weed before you get your trees out of there. Because, like I said, the best way to control it is with that pre-emergent herbicide, and that is going to stop your grass seed from sprouting too.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
So you don't want to use your pre-emergent herbicide when you're planting your pasture field. So take care of it before you cut your trees, and you are going to still have that seed bank in there, but you want to reduce it as much as possible.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be some work. And as you can see, there's all kinds of problems there. But it's possible. And I've seen some very well-managed fields. You're going to have to come up with a weed management plan. You're going to have to figure out how to neutralize that soil. You're going to have to be watching erosion at every single step before you get the grass you want.
And you also want to think about stumps.
Right.
What are you going to do with your stumps? Are you going to grub them out and grind them? Or are you going to just cut them low? Or are you going to cut them in some areas and leave them in others? Because getting those stumps out is going to be a costly endeavor. And you could drag some out with your tractor, but you got to consider, what are you going to do with those stumps and how are you going to re-level that land? Because as those roots decay, it is going to sink a little bit. And with eastern hardwood species, they are prolific stump sprouters and root sprouters. And so you are going to be fighting those trees. They don't want to go. They got their feet in and they want to stick around. So you have to consider, how are you going to control the small trees and the briars and everything else that are going to come up when you open up this area. Some people use goats to mow them down. Other people use an herbicide on the stumps. And just like everything, every farm is going to be different. Every farm has different characteristics, different conditions, and different goals. And so you really need to sit down and make a plan, know what you have, know what you're working towards, and talk to people, talk to foresters, talk to extension agents, talk to your conservation districts and your RC&D offices. Get as much input as you can before you cut that first tree. Because when it comes to forest land, like Dan was saying, as highly erosive soil, you just take those trees out and hope for the best, you're not going to be happy. So plan ahead, take steps to prevent problems, prevent erosion, and control the weeds you don't want. And then you can work towards a better end result that's going to take less time, cost less money, and be of a higher quality.
And don't bite off more than you can chew.
Yeah. Make that. That's my problem. I'm very bad at that. But yeah, don't bite off more than you can chew. That's a great point. All right. With that, we're out of time for today. We'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.